Everybody is doing his national thing. And when you talk about our leaders and the climate change negotiators, we're talking about essentially bureaucrats who are middle-level people. Okay. And then they will push it up to the leaders, and leaders do that.
Thank you very, very much. What we'll do, I think, is take a couple more comments and then respond. Can we pass the mic to the chap here, please? Thank you. And then we'll give everyone a chance to respond.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Ahmed Zubair. I work with the Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah. I was part of the process of G20. My organization, IDB, was along with the other MDBs. And in the G20 summit in London...
ask you what those acronyms mean.
Islamic Development Bank.
Okay.
So as part of the G20 process in the summit, which was held in London on 2nd April, there was a mandate, expanded mandate given to all the MDBs, World Bank, Inter-American, Asian, African Development Bank, and Islamic Development Bank. And the expanded mandate implied was, MDBs to deal with, help developing countries deal with the economic recovery, put in social safety nets, and climate change. And additional $100 billion have been made available, committed by the MDBs over the next 3 years. These are on top of their normal lending. So I think as far as the funding is concerned, the developed countries in the G20 group have already supported MDBs through various capital adequacy measures. And there are plans, firm plans. There's no national treasury involved. These are MDBs, and they have committed $100 billion. So I thought I'd bring this information on the table. Thank you.
Can I ask you to hand the mic 2 rows back to the lady? You, madam. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I fully support...
could you just say who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, my name is Malini Mehra. I'm a climate campaigner from India. I fully support the reframing that people like Anthony have suggested for this, because I think if we continue to have the same kind of discussion using the hackneyed terms of North and South, developed and developing, and continue to have the same demands on finance and technology the way that they've been framed for the last 30 years, we're on the trip to nowhere. And frankly, the next 6 months that we have to do a lot of soul-searching about actually the problem that the crisis that we're trying to solve, and start coming up with some new framing on this. And start also addressing some very, very unpalatable home truths. And those are, in this discussion so far, there's been no discussion of the public interest and the public good. We seem to assume when we talk about these resource transfers, which some people refer to as, well, it's compensation, other people, my government talks it as entitlements, that actually these are not private funds held by the government. It's not as if it's Gordon Brown's money or anyone else's money. This is public money, and there is a responsibility to be accountable on the part of recipients to taxpayers. And there's no discussion here about actually the level of trust which is required to make sure if you are expecting funds from the Swedish taxpayer, the Dutch taxpayer, the Swiss taxpayer, that they will expect some accountability. I'd like to see a little bit of that enter the discussion. The second is from our own perspective in countries like India. We're a middle-income country, okay? We are a development exporter. We're a technology exporter. We have more billionaires than India than Japan does. However, we have very, very inadequate means of domestic resource mobilization. Part of the fact for that is that because we don't trust our government. That's why people don't part with their money. And if you actually want to put money in people's pockets, which is what happens every time there is a major disaster, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's Gujarat, whether it's Orissa floods, what happens? People get the pocket in their money. How? Through remittances. Remittances are the only way, and that flow is much larger than overseas development assistance. So I think we need to address the issue of domestic accountability, making sure that actually if budgets are financed partly, budget support through international development assistance, that actually there is a mechanism for ensuring transparency domestically so that the money goes to where it is required. And this has patently not been happening, which is returning to Jules' point about the fact that now there is such a level of distrust in these mechanisms that people won't put up the money. So let's be honest about the problems on both sides and not assume that having the same conversation is going to solve the crisis that we need to solve.
Thank you. I'll take a couple more comments before getting the panellists to respond. The lady in the back row there, you've been waving. Patient now. We'll try and get around everybody. Now you've been waving as well.
Thank you. My name is Charmian Gooch. I'm from the British NGO Global Witness. I'd like to give a different figure to the panel and ask them a question at the end of it. And that figure is 450 billion per year every year between now and 2030. And that's the figure that the International Energy Agency last year, having looked at the economic plans of a range of world governments, that's the figure that it came up with to meet a 45% increase in energy needs over that same time period, a third of which are oil. Now, these are the very same governments that are sitting down and attempting and failing, really, to negotiate for Copenhagen. There is a really, really dangerous disjunct going on. On the one hand, you have governments effectively planning for massive economic growth using unsustainable fuels. We have, in the meantime, a conversation about, well, can we afford $60 to $90 billion a year for offsetting or finding a way to protect forests, which are going to be vital. Governments have not faced up to the problem that there is going to be a supply crunch for oil and energy. The International Energy Agency is saying that in the next 12 years, they project a 50% decrease in oil supplies. There are some major issues here. This is going to affect attempts to negotiate and work together to deal with climate change. Geopolitical tensions around access to energy are going to become increasingly important, and it's really disappointing to see that in the climate process negotiations, whether it's at Poznan or at Bonn, there is zero awareness and discussion of this fact. And I'd just like to ask the panel, finally, thank you for bearing with me, what they feel governments can and should be doing on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's just pass the mic just over there, and then we'll get some responses.
My name is Ed Girardet. I'm with the Media 21 Global Journalism Network. I'm also a writer. A lot of what we're talking about here is in a language which is quite frankly incomprehensible to people on the outside. And it's very high level, this conference, as are most of them. I think we're missing, our friend from India mentioned it, and I also, with the airline industry, we have to somehow put the issues across and the responsibility to the population at large. And this includes poor people in India, in Angola, in Zimbabwe, and not always look for responsibility to governments or to the private sector, but actually the whole population concerned. But this also means informing the public so they can ask the right questions, and even if each family only pays 1 cent per year toward adaptation or mitigation, they have to become involved. But right now there has been really, quite frankly, insufficient information which allows people to understand why their governments are corrupt, why perhaps the developed countries are reluctant to pay, why perhaps governments such as Angola do not deserve a single penny, or Zimbabwe, with the current leadership which has ransacked those nations and have money stashed away. But it has to be brought down to the lower level, to the grassroots level of responsibility. With the airlines, for example, I think a lot of people are prepared, the general public is prepared to pay a cent or 5 cents or $10 or $100 on an airline ticket or on gasoline, petrol, if they know why. One example, in Kenya, they raised the costs of the national parks without really explaining why. A lot of it, of course, went into the pockets of various ministers, but they then began to explain where the money was going. And people, when they understand where it's going, who is responsible, including themselves, they're willing to do it. I think this conference, or these conferences, need to really try and reach out more, whether through the media, whether through advocacy organizations. You've got to start bringing the responsibility down to the ground level and not only look to Copenhagen or to governments to assume the responsibility.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, a lot of interesting stuff has been raised. I will come to you. Let's just try and tackle some of those. Among the issues, the one of governance, the one of trust, the one of actually whether if taxpayers in the developed world do make a contribution to particularly adaptation costs or the cost of moving to a low-carbon pathway, what happens to the money? Now, who'd like to tackle just that one first?
My answer might not be responsive exactly to your question before I left the room for a while, but because Copenhagen has been mentioned time and again, Dave,